everyone, we're back and we're going to start talking about the principles of cooking meat. So we've gone over the meat basics and we've gone over the different types of meat cuts. Now we're going to talk about how to actually cook the meat and which methods are going to work best. So it's just a really quick overview. So you want to make sure that when you're cooking meat that you're cooking for tenderness. We know that meat is one of the more expensive pieces of a meal. So we want to make sure the food services industries, the different operations must fully understand meat cooking techniques to reduce their waste and to reduce their costs. When their costs start going up due to waste, the cost of the actual meal itself goes up, and that's going to therefore affect the consumers. You want to make sure that they try to leave costs low without cutting corners and still maintaining high quality. So the temperature of the heat source has an important effect on how meat cooks and how it will taste. So there are some times where if you try to have your temperature too high to reduce the amount of cooking time, you're going to burn the outside of your meat, but then leave the inside of it completely raw. And you don't want that because then you have a major loss of flavor. And then there are times too where you will end up having your meat too low or the temperature too low. So the meat will never actually meet the internal temperature that it needs in order for it to be considered safe to consume. So you want to make sure that you find that balance without destroying the dish itself. So one of the methods is to roast meat. It does take a while, so keep that in mind. A lot of these are going to take a little bit longer, and we can't rush through them. So the great thing about roasting meats is that it does not require water or any other liquids. It uses a lot of the fat that is in the piece of meat itself. Sometimes chefs will wrap meat with fat to enhance that flavor, and then that's also what helps retain the moisture. So if the actual piece of meat itself doesn't have a ton of fat on it, you'll see them wrap it with fat. So that could be like strips of really fatty bacon that they'll wrap around and use like toothpicks to pin in there, and then they'll use the roasting method with it, or sometimes they'll use twine. As you guys can kind of like see here in this picture. So that all right there is like the skin, which has a lot of fat on it, and they've gone through in order to make sure that that doesn't fall off. They've wrapped the twine, and that helps retain that moisture. Roasting also requires to rest the meat, and then you always want to carve against the grain. So resting the meat is to basically just literally give it a little break. So after you've cooked everything, you don't immediately start kind of doing all this stuff. Or if you've seasoned it, you don't immediately throw it on the grill right away. You want to season it and then kind of let it rest for a short period, and then you'll start kind of grilling that way and work from there. Some roasting tips is that you want to trim really heavy fat that's covering it, and you want to leave just kind of a thinner layer because again, not a ton of people like eating just the fat. They do want to eat more of that muscle. So if you have too much fat that is on there and you don't trim that down just a bit, people are not going to be satisfied with that texture that's in there. Season the meat several hours before you actually start roasting because you do want that seasoning to kind of penetrate the center of it. You want to season again after cooking is done because you do have to roast meats for a while. Some of that natural flavoring in the seasonings will cook out, and you want to make sure that you don't completely cook it out to when you go bite into it, you've lost a lot of that flavoring, or it's really, really dull. You want to season again before the cooking is done. And then you can season the meat juices and serve with the actual meat itself. So some of you guys will see that if you guys ever make like pot roast and things like that, you'll take the meat juices and stuff and kind of pour it over the top, or like you'll leave it in there for people to like make gravy and things with. Broiling and grilling are two other methods that work really well with meat. When you are kind of grilling and broiling, you do tend to use high heat and faster cooking times. Barbecuing uses slow cooking times and low heat. So again, choose the right and appropriate method for the type of meat that you have. Remember, broiling is when your heat source is on the top and works its way down, whereas grilling, your heat source is on the bottom and goes up. So some tips to follow: shorter cooking times need a higher heat. That doesn't mean, though, that you're trying to cut corners. It just means that certain types of meat don't need a very long time before they're cooked, or then start moving into overcooked. Thicker meat cuts are obviously going to need a longer cooking time because, again, you want to make sure the center of it is cooked all the way. You want to set grill controls for different temperatures. You want to vary cooking temperatures by moving meat across the grill. So you want to make sure that you're not just cooking all in the same half of the grill, because that's not going to rotate that heat evenly. So if you're cooking on like the left side and you go to flip the meat over and you start cooking the other side, when you flip the actual piece of meat itself, make sure you also rotate it to the other side of the grill. And then use high heat for a crispier surface. Again, you're not trying to burn it, you're trying to go crispy. So you have to make sure that you baby this, like you've got to watch it. And then you can create crosshatch grill marks. That's literally where when you're putting it on the grill and you see the basically the rack right down here, you have the meat flipped one way. And then when you go and rotate the meat again, or when you go to flip the meat and things like that, you want to make sure you rotate it, and then you can create those nice, you see it in like all the commercials and stuff of this is what the perfect meat looks like. Sauteing and pan frying, or frying in general, those are two more methods that we've seen as well. We've actually done some of these in class. Both of these are usually used for thin cuts of meat, and that's because in the grill and broiling and stuff like that, they would almost cook too quickly. They'd start burning, and because they're so thin, you do have some shrinkage with meat, especially why you need to make sure that you know your temperatures correctly. So this will kind of help with that shrinkage and make sure that the meat basically is not destroyed in the cooking process. Meats that contain bones or breaded meats are usually pan fried, which is what you're looking at right here. It's a thin layer. You're not filling this all the way up. It's a very thin layer. And then this has a batter on it as well. So sauteing and pan frying tips: always use the right amount of oil. Do not use too much. You could potentially start a fire. If you don't use enough, you're not going to get that crispiness to it. You never overcrowd the pan. This could almost be dubbed as overcrowding. If it was me, I would take this one piece out and just do those two. And then I would do a second round, a second batch, and fry that one as well. You want to turn or move meat little as possible. You're not flipping this 4, 5, 6 different ways. You're probably flipping it about once, maybe twice if you accidentally flip too soon and need to go back to the other side. But you're not continuously flipping this. Okay. And then you do not want to use unclarified butter, as it burns way too easily. Again, when you're sauteing and pan frying, your best bet is just to use oil. The smoke point on oil is way better than it is for butter. And two other methods, we've talked about these before. These are our combination methods: braising and stewing meats. This right here is a picture of braising. And those are all bones and stuff like that, so it's going to make the meat super tender. So the reason that we would braise and stew is because you want to use as much of the animal as possible when you are getting meat off of it. So these two are used for less tender cuts because they take hours to do, and they are either fully submerged or partially submerged in some liquids. So for stewing, the liquid's going to completely cover the meat. For braising, which is what this is, you're only going to partially cover the meat. The liquid used is important for the flavor of the dish. So you're not just throwing in water. You're not just throwing in a random liquid. Is what you want to make sure it's going to pair nicely with what it is. So it's good to probably use a beef stock or a chicken stock, things like that. So you want to make sure that you pair it appropriately. Some tips is that you want to pat the meat dry prior to browning, because remember, these are combinations. So you're going to cook the meat first using some type of dry technique, and then this is the moist technique that's going to follow it. You can dredge the meat in flour before cooking to improve some of that browning. Do not use more liquid than necessary. You do need to measure it out. It's not just kind of like when a lot of people make pasta, they just, they don't really measure the water that goes in there. They just start filling the stock pot until they think it's going to fully submerge. You should measure this out. The meat is done when it's fork tender. So basically you're going to take a fork, you're going to put it in the meat. If it can go in there very easily and slide out easily, then you're good to go. If it goes in there or it struggles going in there, then it's not done yet and it needs some more time. The last thing we're going to look at is meat doneness. So the doneness depends on 5 factors. The cooking method used, the size and type of the meat. Again, thicker meats need longer times. The internal temperatures, most of your meats need to be at least 155 to 165 and above, depending on the type of meat it is. The color as well, and then the amount of time it is cooked. Do know that there are some meats, obviously like beef is one of them for sure, that you can cook to order. So this one right here is probably this is about a medium internal temperature there. Remember to keep in mind, unless something is completely well done and you specifically ask for it to be well done, you do take a risk of getting a foodborne illness, more than likely E. coli or one of those kind of big name ones, because we're purposely telling them not to cook it properly. I don't know whatever or whoever gave the idea of like, hey, you don't really have to cook this all the way. It's going to be great flavor. Technically, scientifically, yes, we should be eating this 100% done. Okay. But every time that we don't, do know that we do take a risk. So here's the last chart too with meat doneness. It's got the 5 different kind of ways of being done, so to speak. So you do have rare. I mean, that is literally slapping it on one side, flipping it over, slapping it on the other, and then boom, it's got a red center. So keep that in mind. That is as close to raw as possible. Medium rare is a step above that. Browned on the surface. It's a thicker gray outer layer, red to a slightly pink center. Medium is going to be brown on the surface, thicker gray outer layer, and then a pink center. So it's kind of like you can see it here. Here's the fully outer layer. Here's that grayish that it was kind of talking about right there. And then there's that warm pink center. Medium well is going to be brown on the surface, thick gray. There's going to be barely any pink whatsoever. And then well done, there's no pink at all. Everything is 100%. It's like a grayish, tannish, and then it's going to be completely finished. So your guys' assignment, again, I have added it onto the end of your notes. So make sure you turn this in. So we went over throughout your notes. If you guys were kind of looking at the top, I tried to point it out. There are 7 common methods to cook meats to get the best flavor. I want you to list the methods in the medium teal boxes. So you're going to have to get out of presentation mode on your guys' copy of the notes, click on the box, and type in the 7 methods. Then you're going to jump down to slide 11. There are 4 questions right here. Tap on the boxes and start typing. And then the last part, you're going to find images using Google to basically find the perfect pictures to represent what rare, medium, medium well, and well done is. And since there's only 5, I blacked that one out, so don't worry about the black box. So that is your assignment. If you guys have any questions, you guys know to email me.